Okay, we start off with our learning sponsors. Year of Learning, Friends of Leonie Meiselman, Leah Saber Bas Chanuch Zundin. Friends of Mel Skotsky, Moshe Zelig Ben Mordechai. Martin Lippman and family in memory of his wife, Malka Chana Bas Pinchas. Friends of Herb Jeremiah Tzvi Ben Zev. Friends of Sam Coleman, Shmuel Ben Yaakov. Friends of Gideon Lazinski, Mordechai Shlomo Ben Meir. Bella and David Adler in memory of her father, Eliyahu Ben Yosef Cohen. Those who were inspired by our Rebbitzin Emerita, Sheila Shapiro, Sarah Esther Malkabas, Meshulam Yisachar. A Month of Learning by Malki and Rabbi David, Dr. Yankee Honig, in memory of her father, Yosef Ben Yecheskel Yehuda. Marcia Federbush, in memory of her husband, Oriel Pinchas Ben Arav Shimon. Gary and Marcia Schrager, in memory of his parents, Freda Bas Hendel and David Ben Yosef. A Week of Learning by Marcia Federbush, again in memory of her mother, Kaya Elka Bas Moshe Akiva. Shelley and Oscar Moll, in memory of her father, Shlomo Reuven Ben Binyamin. Today is the 6th, and therefore we have a day of learning by Saul Goldstein, in memory of his mother, Yita Bat Elimelech Ben Sion. When the Shemas have an Aliyah, Crank Rafia, Velti Yashir, Shema Tzliya, and L'chol B'nai Israel, a good Gaben Shtian. Okay, anybody on this morning? We'll see. Okay, all right. Yesterday's daf, Pei Aleph, okay, was such that it continued all the way through to the top of Pei Bet Amud Aleph. So I want to just clarify, there was a number of people who were there for the daf yesterday. Is there anyone who really needs me to review a little bit up to that point, that last Mishnah at all on the Pei Aleph Amud Beis? Okay, right. Okay, I want to simply point out very quickly, summarizing it and then being able to use that as a jumping off point for our new pairing. Okay. In a situation where you sometimes have individuals, particularly Kohanim, with all due respect to the Kohanim present, okay, that are Zrizim, okay, they are quick to do their job, but they also could be quick-tempered, okay, and if they wanted to divorce their wife, okay, right, what happens is when a Kohen divorces a woman, okay, unlike a regular Israelite who can take that woman back and remarry her, the Kohen could not do that if he ultimately changes his mind. Okay, so the result is that the rabbis came up with a structure to try to slow down the process of the Gittin production and delivery. Okay? What was that method? That was called the Get Mikushar.
Is that only by Kohanim?
No, I wouldn't say, no.
Okay.
Kohanim is is the example we're using because of Kohanim being Zrizim, okay? But it could apply to anyone as well, okay? What did they do? And briefly, what they did is they had the sofer write a line or two of the get, okay? They would fold it and sew it, and then a witness would sign on the, so to speak, sewn. That's where we get the idea maybe of signing on the dotted line. Okay, I'm not sure, but it's just a thought. Okay, and therefore then the sofer would write some more. They fold, sew, sign, things like that. Okay, they felt this would delay the process. Okay, extend the process if you have to do that. What made this different, okay, was that you needed 3 witnesses in that case as a minimum, as opposed to the normal 2 witnesses on a shtar. Okay, So given that situation, okay, it was hoped for that not till after all that was done, then they would give the delivery, the transfer, the delivery, the giving of the get. Okay, and so the Gemara then referred to the question of what happens if we have what's called then in that example of a get mekushar, a get kareach. Okay, but while we might understand the term kareach meaning bald, okay, no implication to any of those present here. Okay, all right. The implication is that it's missing something. Okay, what is it missing? A signature of a aid on one of the folds or sewn pieces. Okay, and so given that situation, there's a whole discussion then in the Gemara of whether or not who could be used as an aid in that situation. Because we said you needed 3 as opposed to 2. Now, certainly we all know that we need at least 2, what we'll call kosher aiding, right? Individuals who normally are acceptable as a witness. That means not a relative, it means not a servant, things like that, not a woman, things like that, okay? However, in this situation, the Gemara basically tells us there's a machloket, who could be used as that third witness. The machloket was between Rabbi Akiva and someone else, Rabbi Ananas. Okay, and the Gemara basically comes at the end on Pei Bet Amud Aleph. Okay, it goes from the question of what do you do, things like that. And the bottom line, okay, on Pei Bet at the end of the parak, okay, is that as follows. Ki atu lekame de Rabbi Ami, when they came before Rabbi Ami, Amarle, say v'hashlim alav eved min hashuk. Okay, so that ultimately the Gemara decides here that we accept the view of Ben Nanas, okay, that you could even use a servant as that third person. Okay, so it's a unique situation. Now, when we get to our new Gemara and our new Mishnah, as we start the next parak, which I believe is going to be the last parak, because we're going to be finishing Gittin a week from tomorrow, okay, as far as I can recollect. All right, so some of the Amudim are longer, some are shorter, okay, but when we get to it, we will. So I want us to understand, okay, in coming back now, having seen all of this concern, and by the way, this get mekushar is the Rabbanat, okay? So we've seen the Gemara, I just pointed out quickly yesterday, that there has to be, number one, an act, okay? Physical acts involved. It's the writing of the get, it's the giving of the get, okay? Because we had Gemara yesterday that said when somebody says simply writing, does that also mean giving or not? Okay, okay. And so there has to be both and there has to be some sort of verbal statement on the part of the husband that this is your get. And he can't simply can he say to her, hey, take it out of my back pocket? Okay, we saw that was a question in the Gemara, whether he could move his direction. And that was enough of a, okay. So now we get to a new situation as we start the new parak. Okay, what does it want us to understand? Hamigareshet ishto va'amar la harei at muteret lechol adam ela leploni. He's divorcing his wife, and he specifically says to her, "You are divorced, or really you are permitted to marry any individual, ela Mr. So-and-so." Okay. Now, if we've said that a statement, okay, Pei Bet Amud Aleph, the beginning of the new parak, okay, if we're saying that a statement, okay, and we know from all sorts of learning in our Gemara so far, okay, that sometimes people do not speak it in explicit manner. What do we do then in this situation? How do we understand the word Ella in his statement? And this is what the Gemara is going to question initially. Do we understand this as with the exception of this person, that you can remarry with the exception of this person? Or do we say something else, okay, that do we say that Ella here means on the condition that you don't marry this person? Gemara wants to try to clarify this because we've had in other situations where it's acceptable for the husband to put a condition in the get. Okay, we saw the example of, here's your get and the condition that you pay me X. Okay, and so long as it was paid, all right, the get was valid. Okay, so is that how we're going to understand this term? Okay, or are we going to understand it not as a conditional statement, but with a factor, with the exception of this term? Why is the issue of exception problematic? Because the get is supposed to be sefer kritut, a clear document of separation. And in that regard, there is no clear separation. If he says you can marry anyone except, okay, she still has some sort of bond there. Okay, so that's what we're going to see in the first part as the Mishnah and Gemara. Good question, Bob. Okay, clearly, if he says on the condition of doing that, okay, and it's a viable condition, okay, like the example the Gemara has given us previously in terms of saying on the condition you pay me X, okay?
On the condition I come back from someplace.
Or the condition I come back from my trip to Puerto Rico or whatever, okay? What happens? Okay, so long as the condition is fulfilled, the get is good, okay? On the question of you can't marry so-and-so, part of the problem is if it's a get kritut, okay, muteret lekol adam, says the Torah, that she has to be eligible for all men. She's not eligible for all men in that situation. And so therefore, it does not provide that issue of satisfy that requirement of sefer kritut, of being a clear break. Okay.
I know you can tell me we'll see in the Gemara, but wouldn't that be if you made a condition that was illegal, wouldn't that just be null and void that part?
That's a good. Let's hold the question in abeyance, okay? Because the Gemara is going to raise a similar kind of question. Okay. All right. So our Mishnah started that he said this language to her using the word Ella, and we don't know for sure whether that's a sign of conditionality or whether that's a sign of exception.
What's the most common use of that word?
Rather. Okay? Whenever you usually see Ella in the Gemara, it means the Gemara is presenting an alternative explanation to what was said before. Okay? Okay, so what happens? Ella Leplon. Rabbi Eliezer Matir, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he accepts it as a valid get and therefore would permit the woman to marry. V'chachamim osrin, and the sages say no good. Okay, Ketzad ya'aseh, what should then be done in that situation? Okay, and this is not the first time we see that a Mishnah, remember, has said you got to take it back, deliver it again. Okay, that's what we're going to proceed. Yidlenu himena v'yachzor v'yitnena la. He takes it back to her, goes back, gives it to her again. V'yomer la harei at muteret l'chol adam. And he says to her, you are permitted to any person. Okay? Now, what happens? What happens now is the following. kitavo betocho. Let's say he wrote within the language of the get. Okay, this statement that again you could accept for so and so, or on the condition of so and not marrying so and so. Afal pi shechazar u'mechako, even though he later may take the get when he gets it back, erase that section, says our Mishnah, pasul, that the get is invalid. Okay? All right. Now, what happens? The Gemara now is bothered by the language of the husband's initial statement, the use of the word Ella. Ibayalaho. So they ask, Hi Ella, this term Ella, okay? What does it refer to? Chutzu, does it refer to with the exception of so-and-so? In other words, you can marry anybody with the exception of Mr. So-and-so. O al minat hu. Or do we understand this as a conditional statement? Chutz, okay? Chutzu, okay, if we understand it as an exception, okay? Ubachutz, hu de plige Rabbanan alei de Rabbi Eliezer. Then this is where the argument exists between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis, that they say that that's not a valid priesthood. He seems to accept the fact that, okay, that it's fine, okay? What happens? Daha shi'er la baget. Why? Because he has omitted something in the get.
You have something over.
He left something out. He's omitted something, namely the effectiveness, and I think that's the key word here. The get is not effective because he's made a statement, you can't marry so-and-so. Therefore, it's not a total priesthood. It's not a total separation. Aval ba'al menat. But were the argument between the rabbis and Rabbi Eliezer on the question of the condition, on the condition that you don't marry so-and-so, modele midi dahava al tanai da'am, then in that case, the use of that language would be no different than any other example of a condition in a get. Okay? Right? O Dilma, or perhaps, if this says the Gemara, al minat hu. Okay, or maybe we're going to argue that the word Ella here really does refer to al minat. Okay, on the condition that you don't marry so and so. All right, and what do we have here? Uba al minat hu deplig depalig Rabbi Eliezer ad Rabbanan. And on that situation, that's where Rabbi Eliezer is arguing versus the rabbis. Aval bachutz, but maybe with the phrase, if we understood the word Ella as with the exception, right? Modeh, Rabbi Eliezer would acknowledge the view of the rabbis, dahashi er la baget, that the husband has omitted something from the get. In other words, its effectiveness by saying you can't marry so-and-so, and it doesn't break their bond. Okay? Amar Ravina. So Ravina says, Tashma, listen to the following Braita. Kol habatim mitam'in b'negaim. I'm going to give an example, says Ravina, where I'm going to try to use another text that also has the word Ella in it, and try to clarify from that text if it gives us an understanding for its use in our Mishnah's text. Okay? Ella, all right, Amar Ravina, Tashma, the following Braita. Kol habatim, all houses, mitam'in b'negaim, the houses can become subject to leprosy. Okay? Or another similar kind. Some want to say it's not exactly leprosy, it's mold, but situation, Ella shel ovdei kochavim. But here we have the word Ella. Does that mean with the exception of houses that belong to Gentiles? Or does it mean, okay, not with the exception? Okay, does it mean on the condition that it occurs to houses of Gentiles? So that's what we have to try to explain. Iyamart b'shleima chutz. If you're going to say in this particular Braita of Ravina's that the word Ela here is to be understood as with the exception, okay, who Shapir, then that's well. Why? Okay, we're going to see in a moment. Ella Iyamart almanat. But if you're going to understand the word Ella in that Braita as on the condition, almanatu, almanat delo mitmo batei of de kochavim, on the condition that the houses of Gentiles don't become tamei, all right? Batei of de kochavim hu, demitamo batei Yisrael, but instead the houses of the Jews become tamei. Ha mitamu batei of de kochavim. Do we say that houses of Gentiles even become tamei? Okay, that doesn't seem to be reasonable. Lo mitamu batei Yisrael, that the houses of the Jews would not become tamei. If the Gentile houses do, wouldn't the Jewish houses do? If the Gentile houses don't, wouldn't the Jewish houses don't?
Meaning of a Gentile house becoming tummy, that's a spiritual thing.
Well, it could be more than that. It means physically also. Okay? Va'od, and furthermore, batei ovdei kochavim mitame. Can we even really argue that it's even possible for homes of Gentiles to become ritually impure? After all, as we're going to cite our pasuk, Vahatanya, isn't it taught elsewhere the following? V'natati negat sarat b'beit eretz achuzatchem. Okay, that the pasuk says that I will put this pestilence or plague or whatever in the house, in the land of your inheritance, your property. Eretz achuzatchem mitam abinagaim. Okay, only the land that belongs to you. In other words, implying that it's Jewish is the one that's going to be subject to that tumah of leprosy or mold, right? Ve'ein batei of de kochavim mitamim b'negaim. But the houses of Gentiles do not become tamei, ritually impure, with this leprosy or the mold. Ela shmamina chutzu shmamina. So therefore, from our example of the Braita, we are now determining that the use of the word Ella has to be, if it's used in that case of the houses, and we understand it as with the exception, we're going to make that parallel and say, therefore, in our Mishnah, his statement of Ella should also be understood as with the exception in that case, which is part of the problem.
Wouldn't we be able to find Ella in other situations, meaning something different?
Maybe the Gemara is going to go there. We'll see. Okay. But right now, at this point, we're saying, okay, that I'm used a comparative basis. Ella here, Ella here. I understand what it is in this case of the Braita. I'm going to use that same understanding in our case. That's what we have so far. Bob.
In a vesting, what is a couple to get divorced? For example, like in a social situation, right? They're gonna have to get divorced. Don't they put in a condition that she can't marry the paramour that caused this?
I have never seen it in a get, okay, to be honest. I've had experience over the years with a few situations. And to answer your question in another way, I once sat as part of a based-in for 5 gittin in a row, okay? And afterwards, the Av based-in said to us, see number 3, see number 5, why are there gittin? Because one from 3 was having a an affair with one from five. It was information we didn't necessarily need as part of the Beit Din. He just felt that was
So they don't say that they can.
so, but it was not written into the text of the get. That's my point. Okay, in that situation. Okay, now we come back. Since Shraga Feivel was kind enough to point out to us, couldn't you have a problem still regarding our Mishnah? The Gemara comes back now and says, wait a second, let's again clarify this situation. And that's where we continue now in the about 2/3 down the Amud, right? Opposite where, okay, there, right?
Near the end of the.
Opposite Tosfit Reed and things like that. Matnitin Deloki Haitana. Our Mishnah then cannot be according to the following Tana, to Tanya, who taught a Braita as follows. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda. Says Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda. Lo nichlaku Rabbi Eliezer v'chachamim. That the argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim. So in other words, we now have a Braita that's giving a different version of what the argument is from what our Mishnah was. All right? No nechlaku Rabbi Eliezer v'chachamim al hamigaresh et ishto, about the divorce of a man from the woman. Va'amar la, where he says, Harei at muteret l'chol adam chutz miploni she'ena migureshet, that she can marry any person with the clear exception of so and so. What happens? That according to that version, that Braita of the argument, the man said very clearly, with the exception of so and so, and therefore, in that version, that's not a valid divorce. Why? Because we implied from our previous discussion that there isn't clear kritut there, no clear separation. Alma nechlaku, what were they arguing about? Al hamigaresh ishto va'amar la harei at muteret l'chol adam al manat shelo titzi leploni. No, says this Braita. What they were really arguing about was not where he made it an exception to the person. There, he's saying, Rabbi, as everybody holds, it's not a valid get. It's the question of his use of language of condition. That's where the argument was between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis. That's what this later Braita seems to be saying. All right, why? As we go to the top of the new Amud, Rabbi Eliezer matir l'chol adam chutz me'oto ha'ish, but Rabbi Eliezer permits her to marry any person with the exception of that same individual. V'chachamim osrim, and the sages disagree. They prohibit it. My tamid the Rabbi Eliezer. So what then is Rabbi Eliezer's rationale? Right? Midi dahava akol t'na'ai da'alma. If we're going to say that Rabbi Eliezer considers that condition in the Braita that we just saw simply like any other kind of normal condition, v'Rabbanan kol t'na'ai da'alma lo shi'er le'baget. Whereas the rabbis feel that any kind of condition in general in a get means that he's omitting something, and therefore any conditional would not be viable for them. Is that the argument? Hacha shi'er la baget. Here, okay, they would say that he omitted something from the get. It's not effective. Umat nidin, and our Mishnah, Do'okimna b'chutz, where we established that the language of Ella was chutz with the exception. My Tama de Rabbi Eliezer. What then would be the rationale for Rabbi Eliezer to permit it. Because we just said from this second version, he was moded to the rabbis that it wasn't going to be good. Okay? Amar Rabbi Yanai, Mishum Zaken Echad, says Rabbi Yanai in the name of one of the elders. Amar Kra, we have a pasuk that says, V'yatsa mi beito, v'alcha v'hayta la'ish acher, that she leaves her home. Here's the pasuk clearly, right? And goes to become to another man. Afilu lo hitira ela leish echad. Okay, that here, even if he only permitted her to a particular person. In other words, she's divorced, even if permitted to, if only to marry one specific person.
But then he's controlling her. Then he's still controlling her.
That's the question.
You can only marry one mistress.
In
Right.
this particular. But then he'd still be controlling
Right?
her.
That's how he's learning the pasuk.
Right.
Okay, that's how he's learning the pasuk. What happens? Hare zo migureshet. Okay, maybe in that case, it would be divorced. But what happens? Rabbanan. Okay, but what about the rabbis? Okay, Hai ish, v'chol ish, v'ish. In other words, they don't darshan the pasuk as to a specific person. They darshan the pasuk as okay, any man. Exactly.
For everybody.
Right. The Rabbi Yochanan Amar Tama the Rabbi Eliezer Mehacha. But Rabbi Yochanan says the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer is from the following, a different pasuk. V'isha grusha me'isha lo yikachu. Okay, all right, that is clearly the prohibition regarding the Kohanim, right? Afilu lo nitgarsha ela me'isha nifsala min hakuhuna. That even if she becomes divorced from that specific man, okay, she is therefore ineligible, let's call it, to marry any Kohen. Right? Alma, okay, have gita. Therefore, that would make it a valid get. The Rabbanan, Isur Kahuna, Shani. But the rabbis would say, no, okay, that second pasuk is unique to the status of the situation with the Kohen, right? By Rabbi Abba, the Kiddushin He'ah. So Rabbi Abba now asks, well, what about, is there a parallel here with Kiddushin? After all, okay, elsewhere we have a drasha that says, basically, the way she goes in is the way she goes out, okay? In other words, how she marries has to be similar to how she is divorced, okay? Right? So what happens? To buy the Rabbi Eliezer, to buy the Rabbanan. We could therefore ask this issue, both in regards to the what I'm going to call the Shita, the approach of Rabbi Eliezer, and we can ask the same question in that regards regarding the purview, the Shita of the rabbis. Okay, let's start with Rabbi Eliezer. To buy the Rabbi Eliezer, we might ask this question in regards to Rabbi Eliezer, namely the restriction that pasuk has just given us on her being able to marry Kohanim, right? Ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Eliezer hacha, but Rabbi Eliezer didn't say it there. Ela mishum de kative kra'ai, with the fact that we have these different psukim, okay? And therefore one pasuk applies in one situation, one to another. Aval hatam, but there, in regards to the Kohanim specifically, kinyan me'aleh ba'inan. There has to be the Kiddushin, has to be in general and overall situation. Right? A valid, complete kinyan. Right. Odilma, or perhaps we're going to say, v'yatz'a v'haita That's the part of the pasuk that we say where she goes out has to be like how she comes in, right? To buy the Rabbanan ad kan. We could ask the same question now according to the view of the rabbis, that up to this point, lo ka'amre Rabbanan hacha, okay, ela de ba'inan kritut veleka, that here the rabbis may not particularly say in regards to Kiddushin, okay, that the same going in and going out is equal, okay, but rather our concern is simply the fact that we require with regards to get complete separation. And we don't have it here when he makes with the exception of so-and-so. Aval hatam, but there, in regards to our case,
Kedushin.
right there, right? Kinyan koldahu, that there is generally a valid acquisition. Odilma, or perhaps, okay, what are we going to say? Yeviyatz avahaita, or perhaps it's just not the case, and the rabbis do accept the fact that you have to have coming in and going out as parallel.
But the difference is that when you're coming in, you're getting married to one person. You're going out, you're open to everybody.
Theoretically, okay, but and so I could argue if that's the case, right? When you're getting married, you're still limiting your at that point. Once you do kiddushin, you're valid only to that one person and to the exclusion of all others. So I might argue, hey, why is that any different than my example in my Mishnah, who when he says you can marry anyone except that one guy? Okay, right? You're making, in other words, you've in a sense segregated one person versus all the others. So he's doing the same thing when he uses that language. Okay, so what happens? Right, lebatar de baile hadar pashta. And so what happens that after he asks the question, okay, he comes up with the answer, right? Bein le Rabbi Eliezer, bein le Rabbanan, ba'inan v'yatsa v'haita. Both Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis do require, okay, that the way she comes into a marriage, so the way she has to exit the marriage, okay? So in other words, just to pause here quick for a second, okay? Rabbi Eliezer is suggesting that restricting the divorce seems to be a valid act. The rabbis are saying that that's not the case, right? Even though we're saying that when one does become betrothed, in a sense, there is some restriction there as well, okay? Namely, you're betrothed to this person, but it restricts you to all others. So Rabbi Eliezer can point to that example and say, hey, there's a parallel there, okay? The same way when she becomes betrothed, she's only to one and restricted to others, okay? So his statement of divorce is the fact that she's restricted to one and permitted to all others.
Goes back to the control.
Okay,
over the body.
all right, so that's why the question of Kriti, right?
So
So what-
that's how to resolve it. They say there's a difference between Rabbi
No.
Eliezer and
So
Chachamim.
that's what we're seeing as part of this, of the underlying concept here. Okay, that Rabbi Eliezer can still hold v'yatsa v'haita and still maintain his position that in stating that it's
And then the way you go out.
okay, hold that position while still saying that get, when he says Ella and understanding it as chutz, okay, could be acceptable to him.
But he
Okay,
understands that
which was the Mishnah and not the Bright.
he understands that the rabbi disagree to that.
Right. Okay. Amar Abaye. So now Abaye says, Im timtzal omar ita the Rabbi Abba. If you've come to find that this is the question raised, right, by Rabbi Abba, Ba Ruvain, v'kidsha chutz mishimon. Let's give a following example, he says. If Rabbi Abba's answer is valid, what about the following scenario? Okay, along comes Reuven, and he betroths a certain woman, saying her that you are betrothed to me, okay, to the exclusion of all others, with the exception of my brother Reuven, with the exception of my brother Shimon. Okay, Uba Shimon, and then along comes Shimon, v'kidsha chutz me Reuven. And he then comes and betroths the same woman and said, you are betrothed to me to the exclusion of all others, with the exception of my brother Reuven. Okay? And what happens? Umetu shnehem, and both brothers die. Okay? At some point, mit yabemet leLevi. She therefore falls to Levi, who is the third brother, as a Yibama. Okay? That would seem too logical, but we have a problem. According to the Torah tells us she becomes a Yibama to one husband and not to two husbands. Right? Says our Gemara, Ve'ein ani koreba eshet shnei metim. But I cannot consider her to be the wife of two husbands. Okay, how is it possible that she would have to do yibum in that situation if the Torah specifically limits it to only one
Ace is
husband?
an ace.
Right. My Tama, what's the reasoning? Kiddushe de Reuven ehenu, Kiddushe de Shimon lo ehenu. Okay, it would seem then that Reuven's betrothal was effective, but Shimon's betrothal was not effective. Ve'ela, but rather, okay, here again is our alternative. Could we even have such a situation, such a scenario? Eshet shnei metim, hechi mishkachem. Is it either possible that the wife, okay, of two deceased men, is that ever found, any even viable? Kagon sheba Reuven. We have it viable, says the Gemara, under the following conditions. That Reuven comes, v'kidsha, okay, and he betroths her, chutz mi Shimon, okay, with what? He betroths her, right? And, right, in that situation, right?
And she's also to everybody except.
Right? So she's exactly. V'kidsha chutz mi Shimon, uba Shimon, v'kidsha stam. Okay? In other words, Reuven, let's call him the older brother for the moment, okay, betroths her with the exception of his brother. Okay? Shimon then comes and betroths the same girl in general. Okay.
But the Gemara just said it's not effective.
Well,
Shimon.
we'll see. Right. The Kedushe Reuven ehenu lemisra a'almu. Okay, that the betrothal of Reuven is beneficial under what circumstances? Okay, to make her forbidden to people in general. Right. The Kedushe de Shimon ehenu, and in that situation also the Kedushin of betrothal of Shimon is also okay, right? But it also what happens? The Misra Aruven, but then that prohibits her to Reuven.
I'm sorry, can you just go over how she could possibly be married to, or even have an heiress to both of them
I
at the
want
same
to know,
time?
I have the same question.
Okay. So one brother comes and says, I betroth you to me, okay, with the exception of my brother.
Okay, now she's an heiress, right?
Right.
So let's back up. We usually work on the premises, we'll get into Kedusha in a couple of weeks. But usually an heiress.
Usually it's about a year later. Okay.
But-
So now,
Okay, Okay,
Oh.
but she's already has Arison with Ruvain. And by having Arison, theoretically, she's already denied from everybody, regardless of what stipulations they put.
Right, but maybe he's, okay, so but he has said, you're right, you're forbidden to everybody except my brother. That's how he betrothed her. He betrothed her on Tanai. The Erisin is out Tanai.
Right, shouldn't take effect because it's impossible.
Logically, you're right, but that doesn't mean, all right? Okay, so then the other brother comes, okay, and he betroths her. Maybe she doesn't know that he's the brother.
But a woman is not allowed to two husbands. I don't get this.
Well, maybe the first, but she may not know that they're brothers, number one. Number two, the first brother came, Shraga 5, who comes and he says, I'll betroth you based on the fact that I will send you 200 shekels next month. Shraga 5's brother then comes, okay, within the next few days, the young lady, and he says, I'm going to betroth you now on the condition that I am giving you 500 shekalim. Okay? Which is she going to accept?
She would already be betrothed to
To the first guy?
her, because he did not make a specific
On the condition?
He did not.
All right,
make
if
that
he made,
condition,
okay.
And
So
therefore,
if he made the
she's
condition,
usher to everybody.
right?
By-
She would, right, so if he made the condition that I will give you the money a month from now,
Right.
And during that month, you shouldn't be open to anybody else.
okay? But that's the condition, okay? Is the condition fulfilled? No, we don't know, because somebody else has come in the interim.
But that condition doesn't. The condition is that when a person gets engaged, she's usher to everybody. And that condition is still true. All he's doing is adding another condition that, in the way you're saying it, that he has to give money. But the condition of when he engages her
Yeah,
is she's usher to everybody else still stands. He didn't limit that.
Until the 30 days are over and he doesn't meet the condition.
Yep, the condition was giving the money.
I don't,
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with her being usher to everybody else except him.
with that 30 days.
for that time period.
That's for the
That
30 days.
does make a difference.
It does.
I'm not sure. I tend to think that in this, if the Gemara wants to present this, okay, as a possible scenario where she could be married to two men at the same time, or at least betrothed to the two of them at the same time.
But we meant they're married then.
Okay,
Now, let me ask you a question. Would it make a difference if she should be, suppose her husband dies, she has a secret to all the brothers. Then two brothers can come and they betroth her. At that case, the two brothers are legally can betroth her,
theoretically,
and then
yeah.
then the same conditions. for
So
the
let's go
betrothed?
back and look at what the Gemara says. All right, Kigon Sheba Ruvain v'kitsha chutz mishimon. Okay, that he betrothed her with the exception of his brother Shimon. Right, Uba Shimon v'kitsha stam. Okay, so in other words, in that case, right, makes her forbidden to all others.
Including Reuven,
Okay,
his brother.
right, right. Okay, but then he comes and he makes her forbidden to everybody. The Kiddushe de Shimon ehenu, says the Gemara, the betrothal of Shimon is acceptable. The Misra Aruvain, okay, to forbid her on Ruvain. Okay, so what happens? By Abai is now going to ask, okay, in this regard, all right, Amar la, if he says to her, Hare at muteret l'chol adam chutz mi Ruvain. Okay, you're permitted to all men except Ruvain, v'Shimon, and Shimon. V'chazar v'amar la. Okay, l'Ruvain v'Shimon mahu. Right? Do we say then that she's forbidden only to the two of them? Okay. Mi amrinin ma'id asar shara. Okay. Do we therefore say that what was forbidden is now permitted? Or dilma ma'id asar shara? Or do we say that what was he permits what was forbidden? In other words, vice versa. Right. So the implication is, do we say then that in that situation she's now permitted to Ruvain and Shimon? Okay. Umay deshara asar im timsalomar. We'll just go over a little bit on the top. May asar shara leRuvain mahu. Okay. Do we assume then that Ruvain is okay only to Ruvain? Mahu leRuvain. What's the sense? Vahu hadin leShimon, and that therefore will be seem to be similar to Shimon. Okay. So what happens with Shimon? V'hai dikamar leRuvain mishum de patach be or dilma leRuvain dafka. Ve'im timsalomar leRuvain dafka the Shimon mahu. Okay. So we're going to leave it in the air here for a moment by saying, can we say that both of them are now permitted to her? Or can we say no, because this one said you can't marry him, that only the one guy is permitted, or the other one says that no, the other fellow is permitted? What's going to be the situation? Okay. So in other words, do they clearly say in their language that this one is forbidden? Are they both forbidden? Things like that. So that's where we're going to pick up. Okay. All right. Well, okay. All right. Well, that's why, tune in tomorrow. So. All right. But anyway, just quick. The Patach Be Odima Ruvain Dafka. Maybe to Ruvain. Ve'im Timselamar Ruvain Dafka. And if you say that he's going to be permitted to Ruvain specifically, the Shimon Mahu. What's the situation? The Shimon, Vahu Hadin Ruvain. Maybe it's the same thing. V'hai dikamar Shimon mishum desalik mine odilma leShimon dafka. Okay. So what happens? So in either case, right? So the Gemara then picks up daf ba'i Rabbi Ashia af Shimon mahu af aruvein kai odilma af alma kai teku. So the Gemara ends with a teku. We'll go over back tomorrow some more.
I'm lost on that last.
Okay. In other words, Rav Ashi is basically saying, can you really say that by excluding this brother, it works for this one, or this one doesn't work for this one, excluding the other one? Are they both out? Okay. Are they both out? What's the situation? The answer is take.
But I'm lost on I don't want you to answer this now, but I'm lost going back like this gentleman as to how he could even be conditioned, that it could be a condition of the Kedushin that you could also be open to my brother. I'm lost on that point.
Okay. Under what circumstances might he make the condition?
He should die maybe? Okay, that's the only thing I can think
I mean,
of.
the more says the condition, he says he's Makadisher and that she's usher to everybody except Shimon.
Right.
You would think that the condition would then say, if I die, then you're open
Speaking
to
of Shochat over here. Yeah, Shochat Yaveh Bikhem Saleh B'Veit Tzadikim. This is these two guys that are into Shochat. That's all bribery. That's why she went ahead and became a transgender.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Anytime you're welcome.
Yeah, it's not so simple to have Harrison.
Right.
Have Harrison with two guys at the same time. Or even if you have the exclusion.
So, but right now, my next thing I'm thinking is today, who would be arrested? So I haven't. If you sit here now until 11 o'clock, I just, that would be great. So the only other thing, the only other thing, thank you so much. So, the only thing the answer is, then I wouldn't be that if there was an answer, we would have already talked about this.
No, the question is that once he betroths her, isn't she forbidden to all? But he says, with the exception of so-and-so. So they're trying to use that parallel argument to say maybe that's part of the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer as to why he accepts restrictive divorce.
Okay, but I think why there's so many special cases that you can't say. No, if they don't even work.
Yeah. Ruvain, I'll meet you out there. Okay?
I'm very ready.
Oh, you're getting a ride with Bob? Okay, very good. Okay, then. Go ahead.